Good afternoon, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session of Rumination with Andrew. Thank you so much for joining as we are about to discuss another important topical matter. Now, this morning, or this afternoon, I should say, I recorded generally in the morning, but published in the afternoon. But I would like to ask the question, is Mark Golding ethnically, culturally, linguistically Jamaican or British? Is Mark Golding ethnically, culturally, nationally, British, linguistically also, British or Jamaican is he? You have to determine that. And I think that this topic should have long been laid to rest. But there is a lot of ignorance that is coming out of Jamaica. That is really disheartening. When I read comments coming out of Jamaica, it's almost like I'm dealing with people of an elementary school. We need to grow up intellectually as a people. And I think that is what Ian Boyne, when he used to write his article, he was appalled at the level of ignorance coming out of Jamaica, not necessarily from the average Joe, but also from those who think that they are intellectuals and that they have been to universities and that they're professionals. The ignorance that comes from them, that emanates from this class, is appalling and disturbing and is preoccupying, to say the least. Now, we should have laid this to rest long ago because you and I know that we should be able to define who a Jamaican is or is not. I remember years ago, I was in Santo Domingo, and there were some North Americans there who I met. And they were telling me of this Jamaican that they had met, and that he was Jamaican and he had just one leg. And they always referred to him as a Jamaican guy. So I said, what Jamaican guy are you talking about? Because at the time, I had not met any Jamaican in Santo Domingo. When they introduced me to the gentleman, I realized that he was Haitian. Now, how did I pick up so quickly and was able to divulge to them that this man is not Jamaican or was not Jamaican? Well, he still resides here because of my cultural sensitivity to Jamaican culture and Jamaican identity. I know who a Jamaican is when he or she opens up his or her mouth. Now, maybe it might be difficult if they are living within a culture. Let us say they have been to North America or Britain for a long time, and they're bicultural and they're able to code switch. It might be difficult, but there are times when they might do something, say something that you will pick up that this person has some Jamaican background. Right. So I'm not suggesting now that you're going to find out in 2 minutes or so on. But evidently that guy, not because of his color, but these so-called white Americans believed, and some black Americans too, that he was Jamaican. And even though I am Jamaican and I could tell them that he's not Jamaican, they still challenged me and said, yes, he's Jamaican. And eventually they learned that he is not. If you listen to his accent, you know he's not Jamaican. Culturally, he's not Jamaican. The way how he speaks and what he was saying to me, he even made up stories about his mother coming from the grill, but the story changed many times. And I realized that he could not have been Jamaican at all. Right? Now, if I should be walking on the streets and I see Mark Golding, whether in Santo Domingo or in the United States or in Great Britain or in Spain, and he begins to speak and his mannerism, I would say I would identify him as a Jamaican, the way how he speaks. Now, we have had many light-skinned, what you call some of who might be white and Jewish and Indian people. We are a pluralistic society. Evidently, we are more African than we are, or African phenotype is more dominant than other ethnic groups. So it's different. Our identities are different from what you would see in Trinidad and Tobago, in Santo Domingo, where the population is much more mixed, and in Guyana. However, it's not to say, therefore, that we do not have other ethnic groups in the minority, what we call the minority, who are Jamaicans. When we look at, the people like the likes of the Erica Allen, who used to be on Radio Jamaica, and the way how she speaks and the way how she looks, She does not speak like the average Jamaican, particularly who live in Jamaica today. She doesn't. Is Erica Allen not Jamaican because of the way how she sounds and her cadence might be closer to the British accent than to an ordinary Jamaican accent? When you also listened to Doreen Samuels and the way how she, communicated when she was alive and was on Radio Jamaican then Television Jamaica, would we say that Doreen Samuels, Megan Thomas, another excellent Jamaican news reader and newscaster, would we say if she were alive that she's not Jamaican because of the way how she speaks and the fact that she was very light-skinned? We have to be careful with what we're saying. What about all of the other politicians that we can mention? Well, you already say that Siaga is, he's a CIA agent, whatever. All right, so we're not going to use him. But let us look at others of our politicians. Let us look at Ronnie Thwaites, who is lighter skinned than Mark Golding, right? Now, is Ronnie Thwaites Jamaican? When he was running to be MP, and I think he was eventually Minister of Education, why didn't you ask him for his birth certificate? Because of his skin tone, his skin pigmentation. Why didn't you ask him for his birth certificate? Why didn't you doubt his Jamaicanness, his Jamaican identity? Now, if we are speaking like that, recently, I must say, I think it was a TikTok video also I was watching, and there was this African-American dude, as you would say, that was speaking about Sean Paul and the fact that, looking at his family tree and the fact, almost suggesting that he's not Jamaican. That's what the essence of his video was. And, harping back to his, other ethnic backgrounds that Sean Paul would have inherited. And the Jamaicans, they were defending him. He's Jamaican and leave us alone because we're out of many one people. And we don't look at color. We look at the culture. We look at how people behave. Now, why aren't we applying that to Mark Golding? Why are we singling out Mark Golding? And I'm no defender, advocate of Mark Golding. I am a defender of principle and truth, ladies and gentlemen. If we begin to throw truth out of the bathtub, it means therefore that we are going to be in problem. Let me say something here also, and I would like to use this analogy. Remember when Trump was running for the presidency, his second term, which he won in November last year. Remember that the whole year was spent around his being a political, convict and, whatever convict he was, and a convicted felon, and how he can't win or they will never allow him to get into office because of what he had done and of being a political convict, a convicted felon. Now, we can see that that was a game. They were using also some of the charges laid against him were charges that were unfair. When you look at what other politicians have done, they were unfair charges. And many of our politicians would have been guilty as charged. However, the point I'm making here, look at how Donald Trump has come back. And I did say to one of my, colleagues that we have to be careful of using the justice system against our leaders, weaponizing it against our leaders, because when we do that, then they can come back and weaponize it against us. Now, evidently, Donald Trump is not using, for the most part, or he might pretend to be using the system against the elites and the other political elites, but it's not affecting them. It's affecting us, the people, right? Because the war is against us. So when we are waging war against Mark Golding and that he's not Jamaican, what if he gets into power and he begins to define who's a Jamaican or who is not a Jamaican, as Donald Trump is doing? And Donald Trump wanting to send the American citizens who were born and raised and bred in America to prisons in El Salvador and around the world. We have to be careful. So that is why we need not to allow our system to decay and to fall into some of the traps that they're setting for us. I would like to know who came up with that idea that Mark Golding is not Jamaican and running with it, and it's causing this sort of nonsensical videos that people are making and comments that people are making about Mark Golding, that he's not Jamaican. And again, I was listening to another TikTok video on, the fact that we have Chinese mechanic shops in Jamaica. And somebody was saying, oh, what's the problem with that if we're about to have a British white prime minister? And for a split second, I was wondering, who's that person talking about? Having a white British prime minister? I thought, my mind went back to the time of colonialism and slavery. But that person was speaking indirectly about Mark Golding, that Mark Golding is British and white. And if you are desirous of, you were thinking of electing a British white person to occupy Jamaica House, then the Chinese can also own a mechanic shop. This is the low level of thinking that we have in Jamaica. All right. And for that reason, let us now recap, since I am a teacher, right? And that is what is in me. I don't want to go back into the classroom, but that is what is in me. Primary first, a teacher. Now, what is nationality? Your nationality is the country you come from. American, Canadian, and Russian are all nationalities. As we can say, Jamaican is also a nationality. A person's nationality is where they are a legal citizen, usually in the country where they were born. Now, based on my understanding, Mark Golding is a legal citizen of Jamaica. And if he were not a legal citizen of Jamaica, you should also blame Andrew Holness, because if Andrew Holness should have access to, and other ministers on the opposition side should have access to his legal identity, shouldn't they? Evidently they should. And if Andrew Holness is this leader that you thought is authentically Jamaican, and why would he not tell you if Mark Golding is not authentically Jamaican? But we know that Mark Golding, because Andrew Holness is intelligent to know that Mark Golding is in fact a legal citizen of Jamaica, born, raised, and bred there. It does not mean, therefore, that because Mark Golding went to school, for some times in Great Britain, that he's not Jamaican. Many elites do that, including in the United States. For many years, for example, in the South, and it still happens in the United States, the elites of the elites in the United States send their children to school in Great Britain. They still admire that elite British culture, that sort of the courtly culture and their mannerisms. Americans don't have that courtly culture, right? They don't have that culture that is as refined as you would see in the British culture. Of course, the British culture is very performative, and lots of it is also not real. But give them their credit. They give us this sort of impressive performance in terms of how they speak and how they interact and how they deal with each other, right? So, Americans to the British, to the British elites, Americans would be the plebs, right? They haven't, it's a young country. They haven't formulated that sort of courtly culture as what you would see in Great Britain. Now, what we have here is a class. Now, we can talk about Mark Golding's class because we know that nationally, he is Jamaican. He's a legal citizen in Jamaica, born and raised there. Now, what is before we go to the class, let's look at the culture. What's the culture? The ideas, customs, and social behavior of a particular people or society. The ideas, custom, and social behavior. When I look at Mark Golding as someone who studies culture, right, and cultures and languages, I don't see in any way how Mark Golding behaves like a British person. Do you? Does Mark Golding behave and speak? Does his intonation, his accent, his cadence, when he opens up his mouth to speak, do you hear a British man speaking? Culturally speaking, do you? No, I'm not suggesting that he has to speak Creole. I had a professor, a lecturer at Michael College who never spoke one word of the Creole. She couldn't, because she was not brought up that way, and she was Jamaican. There was also another student at Michael College when I was there. I won't call her name, but she was what you would probably call a very high-collar Jamaican, and one who never spoke the Creole. And her cadence was much similar also to that of a British accent. That's how she spoke. And she wasn't putting on. That was how she spoke naturally. Now, did we say that she was not Jamaican? Yes, we knew she was Jamaican, but Jamaican of a certain class. Because we know that we have a problem with class in Jamaica. When you go to Haiti, the same thing happens. And that is why when some people now look at Jamaica, they might see another person. In the States, around other places, people will say, you're not Jamaican. They'll tell me, you're not Jamaican. And you're from another Caribbean country. And I'm like, what other Caribbean country are you referring to? But their understanding of Jamaica is this buffoonish, illiterate people who can't speak, who are not educated, who are not sophisticated, who are not cultured. These are the people that they regard as Jamaicans. Now, when you speak intellectually, when you speak in a refined manner, when you are a lighter complexion, many people don't believe also you're Jamaican. So many Jamaicans who look white or half white or they're Chinese. There's this Chinese Jamaican on TikTok, and she has to be proving every day that she's Jamaican. And she's using the Creole, she's using different foods just to prove. But when she speaks, when she opens her mouth, I know she's Jamaican. She doesn't have to prove her Jamaicanness to me or any well-thinking Jamaican, because as she opens up her mouth, even when she's speaking standard English, we know Jamaicans who are well-thinking Jamaicans who are not biased can say that she is Jamaican, not because of her Chinese ethnicity. And she looks Chinese, right? She looks fully Chinese. So it might be those recently, a child of those recently arrived immigrants. She doesn't look anywhere mixed. She is, in fact, Chinese, right? Like both her parents are from China. But the fact of the matter is, most of our Chinese who came to Jamaica in the 19th century and to the early 20th century, they are mixed because having been in Jamaica for a long time. So many of them, probably exception of a few, many of them are Black and Chinese, are very mixed or mixed with other ethnic backgrounds too, coming from Jamaica. So we have always lived with among these different sort of people, right? And we, for the most part, I must say, apart from the Chinese race riot we had in the 60s, Jamaica has always lived harmoniously in terms of racially and ethnically. Persons like the Martin Henrys, he always praised Jamaica about our racial democracy. But I don't think that we are, especially in light of what is coming out now. The only reason why I never talked about it before was because, when we used to talk about the likes of Edward Seaga, I thought because, of what he did and his alleged affiliation with the CIA, I would say then perhaps that's why Jamaicans really particularly don't like him, not because of his color, but because of the fact that they think that he betrayed common trust, right? So that is one of the reasons why I thought. But now that Mark Golding has come, and I'm not saying now that you ought to like Mark Golding. You don't have to like him. In fact, you shouldn't probably, if your conscience does not tell you to vote for Mark Golding, don't vote for him. I'm not here to sell Mark Golding. I am here to sell the truth about Mark Golding's ethnicity and his nationality, that he is authentically 100% Jamaican, right? And if he's not Jamaican, then Ronnie Thwaites is not Jamaican, then Doreen Samuels and Erica Allen and all these people are not Jamaicans. If Mark Golding can't be Jamaican, then why should these people be Jamaican? And what about the elites? What about all of these Arab people down there, the Enriquez and the Azans and whatever? Are they Jamaicans? Are they Jamaicans? The economic elites in Jamaica, are they Jamaicans? You have to make up your mind. Or are Jamaicans only people who don't have any sense and they, can't write a sentence, And that leads me now to class. All right. So what's a class? Now we know that Mark Golding is coming from a different class. All right. A different class. And that is what we have to look at. And we could look at his economic class, right? And the fact that he did come from a privileged class. We can say that Mark Golding has emerged from a privileged class economically, financially. He's never suffered, right? That we can talk about. And we can spend much time talking about that. And that is what you should be channeling your efforts into. Will Mark Golding, as a result of his emergence from a very privileged economic background, will he really defend the interest of the masses of Jamaica's poor? That is a worthy question. And it's, to me, that is what you should spend your time researching and looking at the organizations with which he's affiliated and how these organizations might really work against working class and middle class Jamaicans. If you do that, that is something that I would credit you for doing. What I don't credit people for is when they speak ignorantly and arrogantly, because it's one thing to speak ignorantly, but it's another thing to be arrogant in your ignorance. Many of you are arrogant in your ignorance, and that is why the society cannot grow. Because you fail to say, I am wrong, and that Mark Golding is in fact Jamaican, and that we have to look beyond people's color, because people's color is superficial. And that is what they were looking at, the Americans were looking at the guy here in Santo Domingo, saying that he's Jamaican when he was Haitian. And many Haitians, by the way, in Santo Domingo and the Dominican Republic identify as Jamaicans because they think that Haiti has its sort of a very, terrible connotation here in Santo Domingo, in the DR. So as Black people, they say, oh, I'm Jamaican. I've heard many of them say that they're Jamaicans, and they're not Jamaicans. But the average Joe won't understand that people who are not culturally sensitive as far as Jamaica's culture is concerned, or Jamaican culture is concerned. But as we should be concerned, as far as we should be concerned, I think that we Jamaicans should understand who Mark Golding is, right? We should understand who Mark Golding is. Now, Mark Golding is of British descent, and his mother, as I'm saying, he's also of Jewish descent. Right? So he's not also 100% British, right? He has Jewish blood in him likewise, right? So what is this white man? He's a white man, and he's this and he's that. And what if he were white? In fact, nobody's white and Black, right? These are just, what is social construct. Race is a social construct. It is culture, nationality, and ethnicity that we can talk about. Once it was very common for people to talk about the Jamaican race, the Italian race, the British race, because by that they refer to the culture and the nationality that define who the people are, the way of living, the lifestyle. So you will see that Mark Golding perhaps loves his fried dumplings and his fried bread food, whatever he eats. He might decide to eat more healthily, I'm not sure, but he might, right? He might. When we look at Barack Hussein Obama, and I think that that is happening in Jamaica now, when he was about to come to power in the United States in 2008, when he won the election, people were talking the same thing, that he's not American, that his, he was not born in America, he was born in Kenya, right? And for that reason, he's an American. They came up with all of these conspiracy theories because they didn't like the color of his skin. Some Americans could not deal with the fact that you were going to have a Black man, a so-called Black man, whether you like him or not. And I'm not a pro Barack Hussein Obama, but what they were saying was nonsense. Even then, when I was reading, because I read a lot about him before he came into power, I knew that that was more race baiting, and it was very childish of them to be thinking that he's not American, because culturally he is. When has he ever given us that impression that he's not American? In everything he does, the way how he speaks, the way how he conducts himself, right? You can see that American blood runs through his vein, right? So we have to be able to become now more culturally sensitive. And for that reason, I think that we need to argue for the reintroduction of the humanities back into every nook and cranny of our school system, because our people are just too illiterate. and we need to educate our people. Now, if, as I'm suggesting here, if Andrew Holness is this great guy that you think he is, I think that you should challenge him. If you doubt Mark Golding's nationality, well, have Andrew Holness do some research on his Jamaican identity and publish his birth certificate online, since you want to have that laid to rest. But I don't think that Mark Golding has to do that, because I think that is beneath him, right? Because we can see with our naked eyes that he is Jamaican. What about the black guy there, Professor Rex Netterford? Professor Rex Netterford went out of his way to speak like the king or the queen of England, that he himself forgot he was Jamaican after attending Oxford. He came back with this very strong British accent that formed a part, it was his nature, had become a part of his very nature until he died. Now, would you question Rex Netterford's Jamaican identity, even though he spoke as the Queen of England spoke, with this Oxfordian accent, right? Is it because of his color that you claimed him as Jamaican, and you're now disclaiming Mark Golding, who has a lighter complexion than Rex Netterford had, but speaks like an ordinary middle-class Jamaican? Mark Golding speaks like an ordinary upper middle-class Jamaican. That is how they sound. I don't think that, and maybe the people with whom I'm speaking, the ones who are not aware of the different class structures in Jamaica, maybe they're the ones who are responding to me. So I should not say all Jamaicans are, because I'm sure many Jamaicans know that he is. Now, what the questions we should be posing about Mark Golding are his close connection to the Jamaican economic elites and his desire, perhaps, to accomplish their desired objectives in his cabinet. That's what we should be questioning. Asking him, what are your affiliations? Who is actually supporting your campaign? That is what we should be delving into. And what are their interests, their political and economic interests? That I would defend you. And if Mark Golding is weak there, then we should not vote for him if his political and economic interests are aligned with that of his sponsors, his campaign sponsors, right? Now, another question we should be asking about Mark Golding, what about Golding's involvement in the policies that eventually resulted in Dr. Omar Davis's implementation of the devastating FinSAC policies? That's another question we should be researching and asking questions about. And yes, then I would support these questions and challenging him on those issues. Another question that we should be asking Mark Golding, and not be talking about this nonsense about his nationality and his race or his ethnic group. How did Mark Golding rise so quickly in the PNP party? How did he rise to power so quickly? He ascended to power very, very rapidly, right? How did he achieve that? That's another question we could ask, and we could do more research on, and we could divulge to people. Another question that we should be asking about Mark Golding, what are Mark Golding's social and economic policies to uplift the lives of the masses of poor Jamaicans? That is another question, a very pivotal question we should be asking. Another question that we should be asking Mark Golding, isn't Mark Golding a neoliberal globalist, as Andrew Holness and Bruce Golding are, and the crop of politicians and economists in Jamaica? What is different about him, right? Is he going to pursue a different economic strategy than what we saw the likes of Golding, the likes of Goldings and the Portia Simpson Millers and all of the other previous prime ministers? Another important question to ask. Okay, number 6, will Mark Golding challenge the global geopolitical order which seeks to enslave the majority of the world's population? We should ask him these questions. What is his understanding of the geopolitical challenges that will face Jamaica. Another question that we should be posing to Mark Golding: does Golding possess the testicular fortitude to alter the socioeconomic order that the British left in Jamaica, which fostered a nation of the haves and the have-nots? Will he seek to destroy this order that the British left, or will he continue the order as all of the previous prime ministers have done, including Dr. Andrew Holness? Another question, and that probably is the ultimate question that I have here: will Golding tighten the socioeconomic order of the American neoliberal global institutions such as the IMF, the World Bank, the WHO, the WEF, etc.? And the WEF is the World Economic Forum. Will he continue in the mode in which they operate and have them destroy our sovereignty? Or will he move away from them and pursue economic policies that will help to build Jamaica? Right? These are the important questions that should be posed to Mark Golding. We should not be challenging Mark Golding about something that is obvious, self-evident truth. In the same way that you and I are Jamaicans and we are human beings, Mark Golding is Jamaican, irrespective of the color of his skin. Why are we falling Americans in and falling into this very infantile trap of questioning somebody's identity because of the color of their skin? Right? Yes, Jamaica is predominantly, typically what you call black or brown, but we have sprinklings and minorities of Mark Golding's hue in Jamaica as well. And they are authentically Jamaicans, right? I even thought about the one who is the JLP minister, who is about to retire now. What's his name again? It's not Shaw. The one that is about to retire. I can't forget it. He's sort of broad-faced. Sorry to describe him as such. But yeah, these guys, very light-skinned guys. Very light-skinned guys. And St. Anne, and I grew up in Brownstown, and what's his name was, the Gallimores, who my family is also related to. Very light-skinned people, some of whom you might call white. Right? The Gallimores, yeah, were. And my auntie, or one of my, I shouldn't say aunties, my grandmother's sister, is closely related or was closely related to the Gallimores. Right? And I'm dark skinned. You might just think that, wow, he doesn't have that relationship. And by my cousin's side of family, their family, if you look at some of their family, lots of their family members that came from St. Elizabeth, from white to very light-skinned people. They would not look Jamaican. In fact, I sent a picture to one of my friends showing some of my cousins and their family members. They're living there in St. Elizabeth, and they were saying, wow, are they Jamaicans? They were asking me if they're Jamaicans. Yes, they are Jamaicans. Born and raised in Jamaica. And I know them personally because I grew up with them. Right? So we need to stop looking at people's color and to look at their way of life. The way of life, that's what culture is, the way of life of a people, their customs, their traditions, their foods, the music that they listen to, right? And there's no way I would question Ronnie Thwaites' identity. I know when he opens up his mouth to speak, I know he's Jamaican. When the guy there, Marty Perkins, opened up his mouth to speak, even though he spoke standard English, I know that he is Jamaican. I know that he was Jamaican. He's no longer alive. Okay? So when have we fallen into this sort of mannerism of, let me see if I could find a response here of one of the videos that I published, the last one I published about Mark Golding, to just show you the nonsensical responses coming to me, I am wondering what is happening in the land of Marcus Messiah Garvey. And the lack of intelligence and the low level of reasoning that we have there is quite astonishing, right? It's quite astonishing. Let me see if I can stop this here. And this person was responding. I can't see the latest response. Yeah, I can't see the latest response. So, maybe another time. But the person was responding in the sense that many people have responded that they're not convinced. Nothing that I say is going to convince. They haven't learned anything from the video because they're still not convinced that Mark Golding is Jamaican because he needs to show his birth certificate. And I'm sure if Mark Golding should show his birth certificate tomorrow, because he's already renounced his British citizenship. He's already renounced his British citizenship. I am sure that you are going to say still that he's not Jamaican. Right? No matter what he does in your mind, because you're so ignorant, you're so backward, right? You are politically illiterate. You still are going to say that he is not Jamaican because nothing that anyone says will convince you when you're holding on to a lie. And when people hold on to lies, you can't help them. No matter how much evidence that you put before them, when they are stubborn and they want to embrace lies and deceits, you can't help. There's no way that you can help them. And I don't think Mark Golding should, lower his standards to suit the ordinary Jamaican people. I know he wants their votes, but guess what? You can't lower your standard. It's too low to be telling somebody to be defending your nationality, especially in front of people who should know better and who should know that you are 100% Jamaican. I wonder if those arguments are happening in Trinidad. I wonder if the same arguments are happening in Barbados, in Guyana, when they see, someone. Are they asking a fellow Trinidadian or Guyanese or Barbadian, is that person Barbadian or Guyanese or Trinidadian? I would like to know, but in Jamaica, I think we are on the precipice of formulating this culture that is going to be devastating for many of us because very soon there are people who weaponize the same thing that we have done against them and ask us, are we really Jamaicans? And those of us who don't have the power, the economic power, nor the political power, how are we going to defend ourselves? Like what is happening in America right now. Having weaponized the law against Trump, now he's in office and he's weaponizing the laws against ordinary American citizens, many of whom will not have the power to challenge him and will have to suffer oppression by a man that was deemed also to be a convicted felon. I hope you're making the connection. I hope that you are seeing, because many of you are not able to make connections. You can't think. As a result of that, you are going to be hanging on to ignorance, and it's going to come back to haunt you one of these very fine days. Thank you so much for joining. I hope that you'd like, share, and subscribe. Now, remember now to go and read up on the history of Jamaica and also on the politicians. And go and see the history of Mark Golding. Look at his family tree and get some understanding. Go into the library of the Jamaican Library, right? And learn something about our politicians. But we should know that it is irrefutable, right? It is irrefutable that Mark Golding is 100% Jamaican. Are you?